I don't know. Everyone pulled this class. View. Well, let's wait for them for more.
I have another class after this that doesn't do, so I was like, might as well just.
Well, I'm glad you're here because that way I'm not talking to an empty room. That was crazy last time. Hope nobody walked by because they wouldn't know if I was actually talking to anybody. People are question how crazy. All right, so we are here in methods class. Let's see where we left off. I'm trying to remember what the name of the book was. Who taught what? Was it Maxfield? General issues in research design. We started talking about that. Talked about ecological fallacy, causality, that's the validity, arguments. Sometimes it'll pop up and tell me where we left off. Sometimes it won't. Ooh. Okay, we haven't gotten this far. Issues of logic. Because that will go pretty fast. I think we'll start there then. Scientific realism. That's where we left off. We're talking about drugs and crimes. That sound about right? Excellent. All right, so we'll do this. You should be able to see both me in the corner and then this. So this one right here starts to identify some of the causal problems that we have when we're trying to look at the network of stuff, the relationships among things. Oh, and we just came out of policing. Interesting, because they're talking about domestic stuff, and it's one of those things. It's like you have to realize that this class, if you get into the stats side of it, basically what they're doing is this. It's for any variable, say it ranges from 1 to 10. 1, 2, 10, 7, 3. And you have however many people you have, right? Let's say if there's 100 people involved, you've got 100 scores here. You add all of these up, all the individual scores, you get their sum total, and then you divide by the number to get their average. And then from here, you just take this minus that average score squared. Because if you then total this up, if you just did this, it'd be 0 because it's the average you balance out. And so since they use that square, basically, what it does, that's sort of like a unit change. This is a stats lesson. You probably didn't expect this. It'll come up again later. We won't have to go into the stats lesson. This brief one. And so what you really see here is the distance between your actual score, that one person, and the whole group. And we can add those differences together because of this right here. Otherwise, it's 0 out. And that's why when we get back over to standard deviation, we've taken the score and we square it back down. That's why your standard deviation is the same kind of unit as what you're dealing with. But if you hear anybody talk about variance or anything like that, it's a weird number because it's actually a square. And so when you start dealing with that, realize that all right, hang on, topic. Like the relationship things, you have this person here, this person, this person. This, we're trying to find out the relationship between each individual person and the whole, right? What are you talking about now? We're talking about it in domestics, the philosophical element. What you have to realize there is, can't remember who said it, the whole is more than the sum of its parts, right? And so you have both of those people, but you have that relationship too, and that's something different. Same thing here. We have this thing, but this stuff's something different. What we're able to do with it. That's why we're able to analyze and identify relationships. That's how we make those connections. Problem with this one is like drugs and crime. It's just think of it from a definitional one to begin with. Drugs are crime. just possessing this crime. And so if you have something that its possession is criminal and its use is technically criminal, it is crime. There is no beginning point. It's a big circle. And essentially that's what's going on. If you look at it really in any perspective, is it's a cycle. It's a cyclical thing where whether it's drugs first or crime first, those things are gonna go together. How it affects things at the neighborhood. It's like they both do the same thing. They wear what the neighborhood quality. When you want to get in there and analyze it and figure out how you're going to demonstrate it, that's the hard part, because now you got to figure out, okay, where am I actually starting with? What am I actually measuring? How am I looking for these relationships to exist? And whether or not they do. Okay. Here's where they talk a little about scientific realism, that kind of thing. I like this question. Can the design of streets and intersections be modified to make it more difficult for street drug markets to operate? Yes. Right? What you start doing here is when we're talking about logic and reasoning earlier in the semester, talked about the inductive and deductive reasons. Inductive is upward, deductive is down. This does both. When you start looking at the individual cases and at the aggregate, when you start looking across things, what you start identifying is it's those connections between that matter the most. Usually I use the symbol as a ladder, right? If there's two sides to anything, you can at least try to figure out what's up and down, right? You make a connection between. If you've got 3 points, well, now you can figure out where something is exactly. All right. Unit of analysis. So this is stuff we talked about a little bit. Here's what I go into a little bit more detail. And so we'll go through this pretty fast and we'll buy some numbers. Maybe. Individuals, groups, organizations, social artifacts. Basically what you have there, individuals, anything that's an individual, whether it's a record, a person, a behavior, that kind of a thing, right? Groups. You can make anything a group, right? Essentially, the difference between organizations and group, formal. An organization is a formal group. Groups exist all over the place. A classroom is a group, it's a formal group. University students, peer groups, age groups, all those group things, all kinds of different ways. Social artifacts, that's crime, right? Whether you're dealing with crime itself, here they mentioned stories in newspapers, internet, photographs, all of those things. There's something that's produced by social interaction, right? And so those are things that we could look at too. What was it? I think it was 2 semesters back. Maybe it was 1 semester back. I saw a guy is presenting research. He was studying movies. He was making a link between what was it? It was a feminist theory and monster movies. The depiction of the was it helpless maiden kind of thing. It's pretty cool, right? What was the person drawing off of? This kind of stuff, the social artifacts. You're going through, you're grabbing the movies and you're analyzing the movies for those themes, right? That kind of a thing. Issues of logic. So here's where we start getting the logic stuff. This stuff's actually ecological fallacy is the one I spend the most time on, because that's what most people do, right? Poor areas have more crime, so poor people commit more crime. Like, no. The poor areas have more crime. We know nothing about who's committing crime there. And in terms of victimization, you couldn't even say that the poor people are more victimized, because you'd have to start looking at population rates across the different social classes. Right? That's what we start running into. What happens there is basically it's an aggregation thing where something has been aggregated and they're trying to dial it down to another level, a lower level, usually people, right? It's Your police department had racial disparities in its arrests, therefore you are a racist police officer. Like, well, you could be, or you could have a racist supervisor, or you could have policies that have racially disparate impacts, or you could be serving a minority jurisdiction. It's like, oh, those are all wildly different things that do massively, massively different things. Right? Ecological fallacies, whenever you cross that line, and you've gone from an aggregate to a lower level measure. Individual fallacy. That's when other people do. Between those two, those are the two biggest fallacies you're running. Individual is the exceptions, the exception to the rule, right? We ourselves, in a certain light, we're kind of guilty of that one too. Because if you really look at it, crime itself is an exception to the rule. The general rule is there's no crime anywhere ever. If you really look at it, crime is extremely rare. We have so many people and so much time that it's all over the place. So it says anecdotal evidence make an argument. O.J. Simpson's court resources, right? Oh my goodness, that almost reminds me of Dave Chappelle's joke. And it is a really bad joke about O.J. Simpson. How he set it up. It was something to the effect of basically what that was in the 90s. It was the equivalent of finding out what the price was to kill somebody if you were black, because it's not uncommon. It's just, it was the first time I had that kind of high attention for someone who was, I guess, black. I guess, I don't know. I'd have to look back into it. Because it's not one where you look back and you can find all kinds of high visibility Caucasians. And it's like, yeah, they'd run into that kind of thing. That individual fallacy, the exception to the rule. Usually, a good example would be polydactyly. How many fingers and toes does a person have? 10 and 10, right? Polydactyly, they might have some extra ones. Are they not a person anymore? Of course, they're still a person. But how many fingers and toes do we have? We have 12. No, as a rule, we have 10. That's an exception. All right. Reductionism. Failing to see the myriad of possible factors causing a situation to be studied. As I've been talking about that, we've been addressing it. There's a lot of stuff always going on. Boom. Next up, time dimension. All right. So when they start talking about this one, they have they don't mention here. Observations made at more than one time point can look forward or backwards, right? Kind of the temporal lensing kind of thing. You can use it to look forward or backwards. They have that, was it retro? And I might mention that next one. The specific name of those. It's going to go to the next one. Now, cross-sectional. We've already talked about that. That's NCBS, is a cross-sectional. The UCR, cross-section. Technically, it's longitudinal because they do it every single year, but in any one year, it's a cross-section. Okay, longitudinal, different ways they do it. Trend, cohort, panel. Trend, you're just studying something over time. That's the issue itself. Cohort, you've got a group of people that you're tracking. Panel, same set of people interviewed multiple times. Nope, that went the wrong way. Okay. There are ways that they approximate the longitudinal studies. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about that. Right? Because that's where I start talking about what we were talking about a minute ago. Retrospective, and then there's another term for looking forward. Prospective. There you go. Basically, extrapolation. You run into problems though. Faulty memories, past records. Probably the most common one that we'll run into as we move forward are how things change, right? If I said the UCR, its definition for rate, that keeps two definitions. the current one and the legacy definition. The legacy definition is based off of forcible rape. Those are two wildly different things. Rape as we hold it today, focused on consent. Beforehand, that forcible element was the primary issue, primary factor, determinant. And so those numbers are going to look massively different. If you're trying to track the issue over time, the point in time we made the change in how we classify the issue, we can no longer compare if we don't maintain the old measure too. And so it's one of those things that you have to be a little careful with, whether it's form, how it was coded, that kind of stuff. And it happens with data, happens with people. Okay, I already talked about that. Ooh, that's the last of that one. Cool. That means technically we should probably be prepping for something then. Probably, I don't remember. What is the Blackboard? Here we go. It's not that class. Research methods. That's the wrong research methods. That's the other one. All right, so we have chapter 5. Concepts, operationalizations, and measurements. So here's where we get the good stuff. All right, excellent. Operationalization. Basically, this is the house building aspects of it. That's one way you could look at it. When you start dealing with any bit of research, your base elements are your concepts, right? The types of things that people think are involved in whatever the issue is you're dealing with. If you do a lit review, your lit review is essentially a discussion of what concepts are included and what's been found related to them. Anytime you do a lit review for classes, whatever that issue is, you're going to find it's going to, okay, this issue, say it's violence, is going to be related to maybe gender, X, Y, Z, they'll go through a whole long list of the relationship between those things. As you do that, what you're saying is you're saying that, hey, here are the relationship between these things and how they all work together. That's that conceptualization process. Here's what this term or this idea means, and here's how it relates. When you shift off this operationalization stage, that's when you actually get to the direct measures. We're going to measure it specifically this way. We're going to say this one is, male, female, and it's going to be 0, 1. Right? As you do that, keep in mind what this does. Right? Depending on what you're looking for, you're going to see different directions of effects, right? If I'm looking at violence, right, and I'm measuring the number of violent encounters that have taken place with this person in the last year, that means as this number goes up, this number for this variable is actually decreasing, right? Because 0 is man, we're female is 1, so men don't exist, females do, right? So what it sees here is it sees only the difference here. It doesn't see a 0, 1. It sees 1 unit difference between the two kind of thing. We categorize it that way. What it will show you in terms of effect, it'll say that the role of, say, violence, when we start looking at the different measures it has, it'll have an effect size of whatever this number is, it'll be significant. This size right here will be the same whether you make this one positive and this one negative, or the other way around. It's just whether or not it's positive or negative, right? If I'm looking at violence. So the effect of being male increases the likelihood of being violent to this degree. If I've got it coded this way, I have to say the effects of being female would decrease the likelihood of being violent to this degree. Right? I said the same thing. I said it two different ways because the way it's coded. So depending on what we were talking about, we might want to have it this way, or we might want to recode it this way. Or not that, that's the exact same way. 0, 1, and 1, 0. Concept itself, is it any different or the same? That one's pretty much the same, right? We're dealing with the same variable, we're just switching them. But how do you know if they're the same or not? That's a hell of a question, really what it is. All right, let's go. Make this a little bigger. Nope, it's not going to let me make it any bigger. Where's my chat thing? In case you guys say anything over here. There we go. Here's one for you. A few years back. Do you feel safe or do you feel afraid? Is there any difference there between those things? Some degree, you decide. To some degree. You'll have to go out there in the research that's available and see the different ways that they've conceptualized that and the ways that they've measured it, kind of base it off of that to build off of it. But to some degree, you decide. You could say that these are two separate concepts, or you could say that this is the negative, this is the positive. Or if you're dealing with a study on fear, you might do it the other way around, where I'm trying to address fear, not people's safety. Or if I'm trying to focus more on presenting something that's going to have the effect of making people feel safe, I'm going to word it this way. That's where you start to play with their perception and how you present it. That's where things start to get a little bit questionable. Because now you know what you're doing. You're doing it on purpose. But you should be doing that anyway. Just being very careful as you do it. Okay. So let's see what they say. Understanding the concepts. Enable editing. So it'll move. There we go. Ooh. Has summary devices bring together observations, experiences have something in common. Yeah. Concepts or mental images do not exist in the real world. That's basically talking about how people think. All right, whenever you think about something, people think about things in different ways. Anybody here have photographic memory? No. Okay, that's good. I've heard that can drive people crazy. So you can't forget anything. Eventually, sometimes people run out of room. Those people, it's like I've seen some people like that before. Not necessarily a good thing. Knowing how to forget stuff. That's a very, very useful thing. Let's see. Concepts, mental images. So whenever you think about something, how do you guys think about something if it's not photographic? Yes, don't think. What about internal dialogue? Do you have one of those? Hear words, that kind of thing. We're talking to yourself, you're going through your day. Okay. So you hear words. Where do they come from? Right? It's not easy understanding how thoughts work. It really isn't. To some degree, they kind of pop out of nowhere, right? Whenever you go to sleep at night, whenever you have the dream, sometimes it's a lucid dream where you get control of it. Sometimes it's not. Who's in control of that thing? Where the heck did that come from? Who knows, right? That's part of this, is they're trying to describe that process is anytime you're discussing something, the words you use, they'll key up a whole bunch of whether it's images or thoughts in someone's head. And so this is that we're trying to focus it in on. When I use this term, this is specifically what I mean, right? And then over here, this is what I'm actually measuring to get at it. And so this chapter is just basically talking about that, right? We have that mental side that we're trying to kind of carve into the real world. Let's see. Operationalization is just the empirical side. Yes. Here we go. Mutually exclusive and exhaustive. When you start getting into variables, right? So a big facet of it is that all of your options are there, right? If I were going to ask people their races and I said, we're going to have white and black, right? I've missed some, right? And so some people couldn't respond to that, or they've provided me false information. Another one would be, that's more on the exhaustive side. For the mutually exclusive side, on 10, 20, or 30, which box do I check? Right? And so that's why you'll always see like surveys and things that they'll be like 0 through 9, 10 through 19, or whatever it is, how they break it up. And so that way, each one doesn't intersect with the others. That way, as we're trying to separate these things out, figure out what's causing these differences. Well, we make sure that these things are different, because we have people in their own categories, and none of it works. Right. Okay. Next up, levels of measurement we talked about already. Nominal, ordinal, interval ratio. Precision, reliability, validity, we've already talked about. Concepts can include blah, blah. We'll talk about multiple measures and composites in a second. So this is going to be all about how to do the numbers. So I really need to get into this before I show you the numbers, but hopefully we'll have enough time I can start doing that in here too. Let's see. Is there anything I really need to focus on that? No. Basically, it's this right here, moving from something vague to something measurable and being able to communicate it. All right, so concepts. You know what this is. I don't need to spend too much time on there. Basically, mental images. Whole bunch of them they give you. Some are direct, some are indirect. Some things you can look at and see, some things you can't. Let's see what would be really good here. Color and shape, those are pretty straightforward. Indirect. Says here, criminal history records. So across all of the different criminal interactions, the criminal incidences themselves, you get criminal history. Trying to see where they get that one. It's like, those things are actually, you can look at these directly, but what it is they're trying to pull out that. Badass. Constructs. Theoretical creations. Cannot be observed directly or indirectly. What that means is that's something that we've put together kind of thing. When we start getting into like scales and that kind of stuff, I guess is what we really start really think about that in a tangible sense. I was thinking about reification yet in here. Heard that phrase? Okay. Reification is a phrase that I'll throw around in one of these chapters frequently too. basically what that is, when we take constructs and we start treating them like real things. An example, concentrated disadvantage. Right? What is it we say when we say concentrated disadvantage? We're looking at city structures or neighborhood structures where as disadvantages stack, whether it's there's no income, there's no education, there's no jobs, there's no food, there's sources, there's no transportation. As you start stacking those things up, boy, do they stack up. And there's a relationship between them that as those start to add together, the likelihood that they stack up together really increases, right? That itself is a construct. We don't observe that directly. We see that though as we start looking how it stacks up. Okay. But I'm out of film. I like that. I just saw that pop up. I have a photograph of my out of film. All right. So talking about things stacking up, constructs. Let's see where it goes then. Yeah. Here's where it starts working through it in some ways. We've already been doing this summary, so I'll go pretty fast through it. Right here, violent crime. Offender uses force or threatens to use force against a victim. All right, so when we start talking violent crime, what crimes are going to be included in that? Well, that specific bit of research, that's going to be up to the researchers themselves. They're going to include assaults and batteries. Is robbery going to be included in that or not? Right? Are we including sex-based crimes? Because sometimes those are pulled out and dealt with separately. Do we want one that includes everything? Or is this going to be different for some reason? All right. Dimensions. Ooh, we should talk about that. Indicators versus dimensions. I didn't notice that on the last slide. Indicators, presence or absence is what that's indicating. Those are your dichotomous measures. And you start getting into the dimensions, talking about aspects of it. What do I want to say? Oh, we'll talk about fun. Fear. Specifically in our field, it's fear of crime they're dealing with. But when we deal with fear, it breaks out into a few different dimensions itself. Right? What is it exactly? Well, depending on how you want to study it, what you're looking at, you'll pull into one of these probably three areas. Excuse me, three areas. One's going to be cognitive, the other one's emotional. And this one's behavioral. Right? And so basically what you get from that is you get short, long-term, maybe reaction, could be proaction, kind of a thing. But anyway, a reaction to fear will still be proactive. It's still a reaction, though. That's one of those things you can play with that a little bit, right? If I'm having the fear and change my behaviors off of it, it's a reaction. Emotional. Your short-term reaction to some fear-inducing situation. As you're walking to your vehicle, a cold and dark night, no one's around except for this person over the corner of the parking lot who's looking at you really closely. You might start getting that, right? That's gonna be one of those things. How closely that person's watching me and their behaviors. Ooh, those hairs on the back of my neck might start standing up. I might start to feel a little questionable. I really know what's going on here, right? Depending on what goes on, that emotional reaction can become extremely powerful. That's one thing. But I don't necessarily need to go out to the parking lot to know that danger is there, do I? No. I can think about it. Okay. If I'm going to walk out to that parking lot tonight, it's kind of makes me a little nervous about it, right? Start thinking about that, the dangers there. That's that cognitive side. You're thinking of it, right? It's A risk assessment is what it is. I can give you a situation you can kind of identify. You're thinking about it. You think about it, you can have fear. Presented with something, you can have fear. You'll have behaviors that result. Kind of an interesting way to look at it. You know, something else that's interesting. Those two guys. You guys know who Phobos and Deimos are? They're the two moons of Mars. Greek and Roman literature. This one is phobia. This one, if I remember correctly, is dread. Spider. That's a phobia. Short-term emotional reaction right here. What's this thing? Dread. That's the thing. That's the battle that's coming up that you're dreading. The thing that wakes you at night. The thing that you can't get out. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. Right? So if I told you about Alexander the Great making sacrifices on the hills above the battlefield before facing Darius some several thousand years ago, killing people, sacrificing the god Phobos to instill fear. The fact that Darius fled, they did not have a battle. It worked, right? Same behavior, same types of things. Technically, really close in terms of conceptualizations, and that's like 4,000 years ago. Right? How much we change, how little we change. We just look at it differently. Now we use this side, we use the mathematical side to be able to start pulling these things out. Our baseline concepts, though, didn't change a whole lot. Nobody really sees that, though. All right. So here, there are all kinds of ways you can do this. I mentioned dimensions. You can also look at it sort of like typologies too here. Crime seriousness, okay? How the different ways can be serious. Victim harm, that kind of thing. There's a whole bunch of ways you can break it off. Fear, like you got 3 right here. There are other ways you can do it too. All right. Specification leads to deeper understanding, yes. And the more stuff you can tie it into represents different bodies of literature and information you can tie into and see different relationships as they exist or have existed. Here's reification. Concepts are only abstract and mental creations. Terms we use to describe them do not have any real or concrete meanings. For example, what is poverty, delinquency, and strain? Poverty, you're talking absolute or relative, and realize we have to define both. Next one. Socioeconomic status. What is it? No clue. Right? Somewhere between job, income, career, esteem, I guess requirements to be in the position, actual duties performed, how society values that, all of that kind of stuff. That's where you start to get socioeconomic status, right? That's still going to be to some degree relative to where you're living. Working definition specifically assigned to a term provides a focus. So that working definition is that conceptual definition. As we're dealing with it, we move down here. Well, precisely what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this measure, I'm going to take their income, their education level, and whatever, and I'm going to create a scale that separates those out into these classes or these levels. And let me skip that one for now. Operationalizations we've talked about already. We're just talking about measurement. Whenever you deal with the numbers here, fast. We're going to talk about those. There we go. Nominal ordinal interval ratio. No. Black and white. Talked about this earlier in the semester. This is one of the, between your unit of analysis and your level of measurement. Those are your two most important things related to any one variable. Right? Nominal is just name. Ordinal has an order. Interval means that the space between matters. Ratio has a zero. And what I mean by the space in between matters, I mean space here, space here, and space here are all going to be equal. Right? It's like in music, if you had unequal intervals, if you're writing something, it's like, ew, you just made it a whole lot more difficult than you need to. And this stuff doesn't work if it's not equal interval. You have to drop it down to a lower level of analysis. This one will tell you the odds of falling into a category. If you're looking at nominal, the odds of falling into ratio category X is this, right? Ordinal, your odds of falling into a higher or lower category. You get to interval. That's where you start getting to. This is the effect size. This is how much of an effect this really has on those numbers. So you start getting into more better resolution. Okay. Here it also says ratio can also be treated as any other level. So through that aggregation, we can aggregate people into larger groups. We can do the same thing with numbers, right? We can take these numbers and divide them into groups to create an order or just to create names. That'd be like saying high SES, low SES, right? Your high class, middle class, low class. That's going to be nominal, ordinal. Depending on how you do it. Might just be nominal. Okay. The key standards for reliability and validity. We already talked about that last class. I do not need complete precision. When I say precision, what they mean there is only be as precise as you need to for what it is that you're doing, right? If I start asking you about, to assess, I'm going to provide you the color wheel, and I'm going to give you, we'll say, four colors there. You've got to identify what those colors are. Now, let's say I'm being nice and I provided you with options. There are primary colors. It's pretty easy. If I start going off into like, these are all colors of green, right? The precision needed there, the wording needed, the commonality for people to understand the words that you're talking about. You're no longer talking to a common person there. So your ability to do it starts to increase too. So it's balance. Reliability we talked about last time. Can we repeatedly get the same thing? Anytime you're talking about reliability and validity, it's best to go target shooting. I think the book actually does this. Reliability means they cluster together. Valid means you hit the center, right? So what you want is you want both. You want to be able to repeatedly hit that accurate point. Okay, how to address reliability. Test, retest, interradiator, and it says split out. Those are all different ways to address different types of reliability issues. The test, retest method. That's how I get you guys to do well on your exams in here. You have quizzes. How many times you take? How many times you want? Take it, take it, take it. When you go to take it, you've retested on the material that you've already been testing. Hey, your score improved. Great, right? Inter-rater reliability. That's comparing two different people for two different times, kind of thing, I guess. Look at it this way. I'm going to I'm going to set two people to go and watch the local liquor store. You're going to record for me the age, sex, and race of the people entering. How similar are your reports going to be if you're watching the same one? There'll be some differences. That light-skinned person, is that a light-skinned black person or a dark-skinned light person? I don't know, right? And so you'll have some of that in there. You have to sort all of that out. There are ways to do it. The split half methods where you take stuff like scales, where I've got multiple measures that stack into each other. All right, so let's say I've got last scale I dealt with. I'm not going to get to the date. Yeah. I'm making a joke there. It was about it wasn't my study, it was someone else's study. They had a bunch of questions about venues related to social activities, right? And so how often do you engage in these types of behaviors at these locations, right? And so all of those venues, and if they're the same type, it should be similar. I can take half of those questions to two different groups, have those two different groups answer each of those halves. And whenever I look and compare the two groups together, I should get about the same kinds of numbers, right? That's if it is reliable. Validity, we just talked about it in Amiga 2. A few different ways they do it. Face validity is my favorite because on its face, does it look right? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And you can look at it, we'll start saying criterion or validity, right? You start looking at other things there to see if it matches what you should expect here. So these build off each other, right? So criterion related, I can't say anything. Criterion one. That would be like, what's a good example of that? If I were dealing with, go back to the fear stuff because it's online. I'm surveying an elderly population. This is an elderly population, which we know they tend to have higher fear rates. And so what I would expect is I'd expect them to report higher levels because of the fact that they were elderly to begin with, that kind of a thing. Or if I'm looking within the construct, variables related to other logically expected directions. So I'd be, instead of surveying the elderly, I survey everyone. And I see those same age graded responses there, where it's, hey, the old people are marking up higher. Those who are like younger and in good shape, they have lower levels of fear. That's exactly what I would expect here. That's aligning up here. That construct validity looks to be there, right? Content doesn't cover the range of your meetings. You have problems with that. That's usually one where NCVS, National Crime Victimization Surveys, a good example of that. How many times they have to rephrase their questions because when people read them, they might not realize they were a victim to that crime because of how it's worded. And so that's how they do that. Multiple measures are the best ways to do it, though. Multiple measures means that you measured something on a couple of different ways. So that way you can look to see if those measures align. That's why when you get surveys like personality tests and stuff like that, you get so many questions that seem really, really similar, right? So what it is, they're testing that element of you over and over. So it'll change a few words in the sentence to see if your answer is stable. And if it isn't, well, what that will mean is if you do that enough, it'll give you inconclusive results, right? Because it can't put you in any one of those categories. But that's if you're paying attention and you're trying to get that. Most people just take it honestly. And what you get there is the different ways that they word it, they have changed just enough of the words that they know, okay, this should be where we'll break off at this point. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. All right, composite measures. That's where they start talking about single indicators of complex concepts. So rather than that, We do several categories to create indexes and scales. And so we'll leave it at that there. So that gets us into scales. Next, we'll talk about taxonomies, typologies next. And then we'll do that, knock out a review, and then I'll start playing with data on Monday. I've got that ready. I do need to check while we're in here real quick if they got it to where the remote desktop is working too. Let me check that real quick, and then you all will be free. All right. See if that worked. Because the last time I did this, they had just, I think, re-upped SPSS. You're gonna make me sign in again. Let's see that one. Oh, that's not it. Another user is signed in. No, I'll play with that later then. I don't know why it's doing that. Anyhow, so next time if I can get the remote desktop, make sure that it works. I'll start showing you guys how to work SPSS. Excel's pretty straightforward. That won't take me very long to show you guys the shortcuts there, that kind of thing. SPSS is where you'll start to see some of those things that are talking there, whether it's ecological fallacy. Another one that'll come up pretty soon is multicollinearity. That's whenever you're measuring multiple things, but not really. It's the same thing. They're tracking too closely because you different enough that you can separate them out. But we'll talk about that next time. Back. Have a great fall break. Catch you guys on Monday. Cool. All right. Catch you then. Bye. What is my right here? Stop show. You too.